The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marius Orlov's office like bullets against glass. Each drop a tiny percussion in the symphony of the storm, ravaging Naples tonight. I stood 3 feet from his mahogany desk, my tablet pressed against my chest, waiting for him to finish the phone call that had already stretched 15 minutes past our scheduled meeting time. He didn't acknowledge my presence. He never did, not immediately. That was part of the game we'd played for 3 years, this careful dance of professional distance and unspoken tension that hummed between us like a live wire neither of us dared touch. Non mi interessa, Marius said into the phone, his voice dropping to that dangerous register that made grown men stumble over their words. His Italian was flawless, rolling off his tongue with the kind of casual authority that came from years of commanding empires built on fear and absolute loyalty. If Petrov thinks he can renegotiate terms after the shipment has already cleared customs, remind him what happened to the last man who tried to play games with me. I kept my expression neutral, my gaze fixed on a point just past his left shoulder, where a Caravaggio hung in perfect museum lighting. The painting was worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, depicting Judith beheading Holofernes with an expression of cold determination I'd come to understand intimately over the years. Marius collected art the way other men collected cars, each piece chosen not for beauty, but for the story it told about power, violence, and the cost of both. He ended the call without pleasantries, dropping his phone onto the leather desk pad with a controlled precision that somehow felt more threatening than if he'd hurled it across the room. Only then did his eyes lift to mine, that glacial gray that had unnerved better people than me. "The Calabria meeting," I said before he could speak. My voice steady despite the way his attention always felt like being pinned beneath a microscope. "Moved to Thursday at 11. Romano's people confirmed the location change. Neutral ground as you requested. I've arranged for Dmitri and 6 others to secure the perimeter 2 hours before arrival." Marius leaned back in his chair, the movement causing his white dress shirt to pull taut across shoulders that had nothing to do with tailoring, and everything to do with the hours he spent in the private gym 3 floors below this penthouse office. The first 4 buttons of that shirt were undone, as they always were by this time of evening, revealing the hollow of his throat and the beginning of the defined chest beneath. "And the contracts from the Vienna shipment?" His accent was subtle, just a trace of Russian threading through his otherwise perfect English, appearing only on certain consonants in a way that shouldn't have been as attractive as it was. I swiped through my tablet with practiced efficiency. "Signed and filed. The payments cleared through the Luxembourg accounts this afternoon. No flags, no delays, no questions." "Good." He reached for the crystal tumbler on his desk, the amber liquid inside catching the light from the art lamps. "Whiskey, single malt, probably older than I was." He never drank during the day, but once the sun set over the Bay of Naples, Marius allowed himself this single indulgence. "The Rossi situation?" "Handled," I confirmed. "His daughter's university tuition has been paid in full for the next 3 years. He's withdrawn his complaint to the commission and issued a public apology for the misunderstanding." Something that might have been approval flickered in Marius's eyes. "You're efficient, Bianca, as always." 3 years, and compliments from him still felt like victories earned on a battlefield. I'd started as his personal assistant when I was 22, fresh out of university with a degree in international business, and absolutely no idea what I was walking into. The job posting had been vague, the salary obscene, the interview conducted by a stone-faced woman named Katya, who'd asked questions that had nothing to do with typing speed, and everything to do with my ability to keep secrets. I'd needed the money. My mother's medical bills had been crushing our family, and the legitimate jobs I'd applied for offered salaries that wouldn't have covered even a fraction of what we owed. So when Katya had looked me dead in the eye and asked if I could work for a man whose business interests occasionally operated in gray areas, I'd said yes without hesitation. Gray areas. That's what they'd called it, as if Marius Orlov's empire was built on anything resembling legitimate commerce. I'd learned the truth within the first week. The shipments that came and went through his import-export company carried more than luxury goods. The meetings I scheduled were negotiations over territory, tribute, and the occasional need to remind someone of the cost of betrayal. The phone calls I screened included everyone from politicians to police commissioners to men whose names appeared on Interpol watch lists. But I'd also learned that Marius kept his word, paid his debts, and protected those who served him with a fierceness that bordered on fanatical. When my mother had needed experimental treatment not covered by insurance, he'd made a single phone call and the best oncologist in Europe had been on a plane to Naples within 24 hours. When a rival family had tried to use me as leverage against him 6 months into my employment, he'd responded with such swift and absolute brutality that no one had dared threaten me since. I was his assistant. That made me untouchable. It also made me his, in a way that had nothing to do with employment contracts and everything to do with the unspoken rules of his world. "There's one more thing," I said, consulting my tablet even though I'd memorized this part of my schedule hours ago. "I'll need to leave early tomorrow, around 6. Marius had been lifting the whiskey to his lips. He paused, the glass suspended in mid-air, his attention sharpening with sudden focus. "Early? You never leave early." "I have plans." I kept my voice carefully neutral, professional. "I've already rescheduled your 8 o'clock with the auditors to Wednesday morning, and the contracts for the Athens property will be on your desk by 5. Everything will be handled before I go." The silence that followed felt heavy, weighted with something I couldn't quite name. Marius set down his glass with deliberate care, his gray eyes never leaving my face. "What kind of plans?" His voice was deceptively soft, the kind of soft that preceded violence in other contexts. This was the moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading. 3 years of perfect professionalism, of maintaining exactly the right distance, of pretending I didn't notice the way his gaze sometimes lingered on me a beat too long, or the way his jaw tightened when other men in his organization looked at me with anything resembling interest. 3 years of him never crossing that line, never making this complicated, never treating me as anything other than the most competent personal assistant he'd ever employed. 3 years of me telling myself that the tension between us was imagined, that the flutter in my stomach when he said my name was just nerves, that the dreams I occasionally had about those gray eyes darkening with something other than anger meant nothing at all. "A date," I said, meeting his stare with calm I didn't entirely feel. "I have a date." The change in Marius was subtle, but unmistakable. His shoulders tensed, just fractionally. His fingers, which had been drumming a lazy rhythm on the desk, went still. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind those gray eyes. Something dark and dangerous, and entirely too close to possession. "A date," he repeated, as if testing the word, finding it foreign on his tongue. "Yes." I refused to elaborate, refused to explain or justify. I was 25 years old. I was allowed to have a personal life, even if I'd neglected that part of myself for 3 years, while building my career in service to a man who commanded loyalty through fear and respect in equal measure. Marius reached for something on his desk, his movements controlled and precise. A silver cigarette case I'd seen 1,000 times but never seen him open. He extracted a cigarette with fingers that were completely steady, placed it between his lips, and produced a lighter with his other hand. He didn't smoke. In 3 years, I'd never seen him smoke. He kept the cigarettes as a prop, a relic from his father's generation, something to do with his hands during tense negotiations. The flame flared to life, illuminating the sharp angles of his face, the strong jaw, the slight scar that traced his left eyebrow from some long-ago violence. He drew in slowly, the cherry of the cigarette glowing red in the dimness of the office, and then exhaled a thin stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "Who is he?" The question emerged through that smoke, quiet and lethal. "No one you know." That was true. Marco was an architect I'd met at a gallery opening last month. Someone completely outside Marius's world of shipments and territories and carefully negotiated truces. Someone normal, who talked about building designs and art movements instead of how to move contraband through European customs. Someone safe. Name, Marius said, and it wasn't a request. I'd anticipated this, the way he'd try to turn this into an interrogation, to use his authority to extract information I had no obligation to provide. That's not relevant to my employment, Mr. Orlov. The formal address landed like a slap. I never called him Mr. Orlov, not after the first 6 months. It had always been Marius, that small intimacy he'd granted me without ever explicitly offering it, the invisible line that separated me from everyone else who worked for him. His eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the deliberate distance I was creating. Everything about you is relevant to your employment, Bianca. Your safety is my responsibility. I'll be having dinner at a restaurant in the Chiaya district, I replied, keeping my voice level. Public place, well lit, excellent security. I'll have my phone. If there's an emergency, you can reach me. That's not what I meant. He took another drag from the cigarette, the smoke curling around him like a living thing. I need to know who you're seeing. I need to vet him. No, I said simply. You don't. The word hung between us, a challenge I'd never issued before. In 3 years, I'd never told Marius Orlov no. I'd negotiated, suggested alternatives, provided different perspectives, but I'd never refused him directly. Until now. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the carefully maintained facade of control. You're saying no to me? I'm saying that my personal life is my own, I corrected. You employ me, Marius. You don't own me. He stood then, the movement sudden enough to make my pulse spike despite years of learning to read his moods, to predict his reactions. But he didn't move toward me. Instead, he walked to the windows, his back to me, one hand thrust into the pocket of his tailored black trousers, while the other raised the cigarette to his lips. The rain continued its assault on the glass, and the city sprawled below us, a carpet of lights that represented his kingdom in all but name. Naples belonged to Marius Orlov in ways that had nothing to do with legal ownership and everything to do with the fear and respect he commanded. 3 years, he said, his voice so low I almost didn't hear it over the storm. 3 years you've worked for me. Not once have you asked for personal time. Not once have you mentioned seeing anyone. I haven't been seeing anyone, I admitted. This is new. How new? He turned his head slightly, not enough to look at me, just enough that I could see his profile against the rain-streaked glass. We've been talking for a few weeks. Tomorrow would be our first actual date. Marius took another drag from the cigarette, the ember flaring bright in the reflection. And you think this architect, this Marco, can give you what you need? The fact that he knew Marco's name, despite my not having provided it, sent a chill down my spine. Of course he knew. Marius Orlov made it his business to know everything about everyone in his orbit, and I'd been in close orbit for 3 years. I think he's a good man, I said carefully. I think he deserves a chance. A good man, Marius laughed, the sound empty of humor. And what would a good man want with someone who works for a monster? The self-awareness in that question struck me harder than I'd expected. You're not a monster. No? He turned then, finally facing me fully, and the expression on his face was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not the cold calculation he showed enemies, but something raw and almost vulnerable. Then what am I? Bianca? What do you see when you look at me? The question felt like a trap, like one wrong word would shatter whatever careful equilibrium we'd maintained all this time. But I'd already crossed so many lines tonight. What was one more? I see a man who does difficult things to protect what's his, I said quietly. I see someone who keeps his word, who values loyalty, who built something extraordinary through sheer will. I see my employer. Your employer, he repeated, his mouth twisting slightly. Is that all? The air between us felt charged, electric, dangerous. This was the cliff's edge, the moment where everything could change irrevocably. I could lie, could maintain the professional distance we'd so carefully cultivated. Or I could tell the truth and deal with whatever consequences that brought. I need to have a personal life. Marius, I said instead, dodging the question entirely. I need to see if there's something normal waiting for me outside these walls. He studied me for a long moment, those gray eyes searching for something I wasn't sure I could give him. Then he nodded once, a sharp jerk of his head that spoke of resignation rather than acceptance. Go on your date, Bianca, he said, turning back to the window. We'll discuss your schedule adjustments in the morning. It felt like a dismissal, but also like a reprieve. I turned to leave, had my hand on the door handle when his voice stopped me. Bianca. I looked back. He was still facing the window, the cigarette burning forgotten between his fingers. Be careful, he said softly. The world outside these walls isn't as safe as you think. I left without responding, because there was nothing I could say that wouldn't make this worse. As the elevator descended from his penthouse office to the parking garage where my car waited, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Tomorrow night, I would have dinner with Marco. I would laugh at his stories about difficult clients and architectural disasters. I would try to feel something, anything, that approximated the electric charge I felt every time Marius Orlov looked at me. I would try to be normal. But as I drove through the rain-soaked streets of Naples toward the small apartment I'd purchased with my generous salary, I couldn't shake the image of Marius standing at those windows, smoking a cigarette he didn't want, watching the city that belonged to him. And I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's date had just become something far more complicated than I'd intended. The morning meeting started at exactly 8 o'clock, as all of Marius's meetings did. Precision was religion in his world, and lateness was blasphemy punishable by consequences no one wanted to face twice. I sat in my usual chair, slightly behind and to the right of Marius's position at the head of the conference table, my tablet open to the meeting agenda I'd prepared at 5 this morning, after a restless night of tangled sheets and circular thoughts about gray eyes and cigarette smoke. 6 men occupied the other seats, each one a piece of Marius's carefully constructed empire. Dmitri, his head of security, built like a brick wall, with a face that suggested violence was his preferred language. Alexei, who managed the shipping operations and had the kind of bland features that made him forgettable, which was precisely why he was so effective. 4 others whose roles I'd learned to track without needing introduction. Territory managers and fixers, and the men who made problems disappear. The Rotterdam shipment clears customs on Friday, Alexei was saying, his fingers steepled on the table before him. Our contact at the Port Authority has confirmed the inspection schedule. We'll have a 4-hour window. Marius listened with the stillness of a predator waiting to strike, his expression revealing nothing. He'd arrived this morning in another immaculate suit, charcoal gray today, with that same white shirt open at the collar. I'd stopped pretending I didn't notice the way he dressed, the careful attention to detail that made every outfit look effortless, while costing more than most people's monthly rent. And the Amsterdam connection? Marius asked. Solid. Vanderberg's people are in place. No complications anticipated. I made notes on my tablet, tracking the conversation, even though I'd never been asked to record these meetings. But after 3 years, I'd learned that my value wasn't just in managing Marius's schedule. It was in knowing everything, in being the repository of details he might need at 3 a.m, when some crisis erupted, and he needed to move faster than memory alone allowed. The meeting progressed through its agenda with mechanical efficiency. Territories were discussed, tributes calculated, problems identified, and solutions proposed. Through it all, Marius remained focused and present, asking sharp questions that revealed the strategic mind behind the expensive suits and calculated violence. He didn't look at me. Not once. That should have been normal. In meetings, Marius rarely acknowledged my presence except when he needed information I'd compiled. But today, the deliberate nature of his inattention felt weighted, purposeful, as if he was proving something to himself, or to me, or perhaps to both of us. "There's one more thing," Dmitri said, as the meeting wound down. His English carried a heavier accent than Marius's, all hard consonants and shortened vowels. "We've had inquiries about Bianca." My attention snapped to him, pulse quickening. In 3 years, I'd been mentioned in these meetings exactly once, when Marius had informed his inner circle that I was protected property, and anyone who touched me would find themselves in pieces at the bottom of the bay. Marius's stillness acquired a different quality, something dangerous coiling beneath the surface. "What kind of inquiries?" "Nothing serious," Dmitri assured him. "Some of DeLuca's people asking questions. Who she is, what she does, if she's available." "Available," Marius repeated, his voice dropping to that lethal register I'd heard on the phone last night. "Explain that word, Dmitri." "They want to know if she's under your protection, or just an employee." Dmitri's gaze flicked to me, then back to Marius. "DeLuca's nephew, Carlo. He saw her at the opera last month. Wants an introduction." I remembered that night. Marius had needed a companion for a charity event, something legitimate where appearing alone would have raised questions. I'd worn a black dress that cost more than my first car, sat beside him in his private box, and tried not to notice the way his hand had rested on the small of my back when we'd arrived, the casual possessiveness of the gesture. "Tell Carlo DeLuca," Marius said, each word precisely enunciated, "that Bianca is under my protection. Tell him that any man who approaches her without my explicit permission will find out exactly what that protection means. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Dmitri confirmed. Marius stood, signaling the meeting's end. The other men filed out quickly, reading the tension in the room with the survival instincts that had kept them alive in this business. Only Dmitri lingered, exchanging a look with Marius that I couldn't quite interpret, before he too departed. Then it was just the two of us in the conference room, the silence heavy with everything unsaid. "You don't need to scare away every man who looks at me," I said quietly, closing my tablet. "I'm not scaring them away." Marius moved to the windows, as he had last night, as he always did when conversations turned difficult. "I'm protecting my investment." "Is that what I am? An investment?" He didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the Naples skyline. Morning sun glinted off the bay in the distance, turning the water into hammered silver. "Your date tonight," he said instead. "This Marco. Has he been vetted? By whom?" I kept my voice carefully neutral. "You?" "My people conducted a background check. Standard procedure for anyone entering my inner circle's social sphere." Something cold slithered through my stomach. "I'm not your inner circle, Marius. I'm your assistant, and Marco isn't entering anything. He's taking me to dinner." "Marco Santini, 32, senior architect at Rossini Design Studio," Marius recited as if reading from a file. "Graduated from Politecnico di Milano. Parents own a small vineyard in Tuscany. No criminal record, no significant debts, no problematic associations." He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "He's boring, Bianca. Completely, thoroughly boring." Anger flared hot and bright in my chest. "You had him investigated?" "I have everyone investigated." "This is different." I stood, my tablet clutched like a shield. "This is my personal life." "There is no personal life in my world," Marius said flatly. "There's only what can be used against you, and what can't. Marco Santini is a vulnerability." "He's a normal man who asked me to dinner." "Exactly." Marius's jaw tightened. Normal. Safe. Everything I'm not. The words hung between us, charged with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. "I need to take this," he said. "Reschedule the Athens call to this afternoon. And Bianca?" He waited until I met his eyes. "Enjoy your dinner, but keep your phone on." It was a command disguised as concern, and we both knew it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of calls and contracts, and the 1,000 small fires that required my constant attention. I threw myself into work with single-minded focus, trying not to think about the fact that Marius had investigated Marco, that he'd cataloged my date's entire life as if he were a potential business threat. Trying not to think about why that made me more angry than afraid. At 5:30, I prepared to leave. I'd brought a change of clothes, a simple blue dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, shoes that wouldn't cripple me over a 2-hour dinner. I touched up my makeup in the executive bathroom, studying my reflection with critical eyes. I looked professional, competent. Nothing like the kind of woman who'd spent 3 years in the orbit of one of the most dangerous men in Naples without losing herself completely. When I emerged, Marius was waiting in my office. He'd never done that before, never invaded my space. His office, the conference room, the private elevator, these were his domains. But my office, with its neat desk and organized files and the small photograph of my mother I kept on the credenza, this was mine. Until now. "Is there something you need?" I asked, setting my bag on the desk with deliberate calm. "Yes." He stood from where he'd been leaning against my desk, his height suddenly overwhelming in the smaller space. "I need you to cancel your date." "No. Bianca." He moved closer, and I caught his scent, something expensive and cedar sharp. "This isn't about control. There's a situation developing. The DeLuca family is making moves, testing boundaries. It's not safe for you to be out in public tonight." "Then assign me security," I countered. "Dimitri can follow at a discreet distance, but I'm going." Something flashed in his eyes, frustrated and angry, and something else I couldn't name. Why? Why is this architect so important? "Because he sees me!" The words burst out before I could stop them, 3 years of carefully maintained composure cracking. "He sees Bianca, not Marius Orlov's assistant, not someone who needs protecting or investigating or controlling. Just me." Marius went very still. "I see you." "No." I shook my head, grabbing my bag. "You see an asset, a very competent, very useful asset. But that's all I am to you." I moved to step past him, but his hand shot out, catching my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. The contact sent electricity racing up my arm, that same charge I always felt when we accidentally touched, when he handed me a file and our fingers brushed, when he steadied me after I'd stumbled in heels on rain-slick marble. "You're wrong," he said, his voice low and rough. "You're so wrong about what you are to me." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Then tell me. Tell me what I am." His thumb traced over my pulse point, surely feeling the way it raced beneath his touch. For a moment, I thought he might actually say it, might actually name this thing that lived in the space between us. Then he released me, stepping back, his expression shuddering. "Go on your date, Bianca, but take Dimitri. That's not negotiable." It was all the admission I was going to get. I nodded once and left, my wrist still burning from his touch. Dimitri followed my car to the restaurant in an unmarked sedan, professional and unobtrusive. Marco was already waiting at our table when I arrived, standing to greet me with a warm smile that held nothing but genuine pleasure at seeing me. He was handsome in a conventional way, dark hair neatly trimmed, kind brown eyes, an easy laugh that came frequently as we talked about his current project, a cultural center designed to bridge old Naples with new. He was everything Marius wasn't. Open, uncomplicated, safe. And I felt absolutely nothing. "Oh," I laughed at his stories. I contributed to the conversation. I maintained the perfect facade of a woman enjoying a first date with a nice man who represented everything normal I'd been craving. But when his hand covered mine across the table, I felt only the wrongness of it, the absence of electricity, the way my skin stayed quiet instead of singing with awareness. This should have worked. Marco was exactly what I needed, what I'd convinced myself I wanted. Except I couldn't stop thinking about gray eyes and cigarette smoke and the way Marius had said "you're wrong about what you are" to me, as if the words cost him something precious. "You seem distracted," Marco observed gently. "Is everything all right?" "Just work," I lied. "My boss is demanding." "The import-export business?" Marco's smile was sympathetic. "I can imagine. My cousin works in shipping. The stress is incredible. If he only knew. If he knew that my boss commanded an empire built on fear, that the men I scheduled meetings with were as likely to end those meetings with blood as with handshakes, that I'd become fluent in the language of violence through proximity alone. Would Marco still be sitting here, smiling at me, if he knew the truth? My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again. "You can check that," Marco said. "Really, I don't mind." I pulled out my phone, expecting some manufactured crisis, some excuse for Marius to summon me back. Instead, there was a single text. "The DeLuca situation escalated. Dimitri is with you. Stay in public spaces. I'll handle this." Nothing about coming back. Nothing demanding my presence. Just that he'd handle it. That I was protected. That I should continue my date. "Everything okay?" Marco asked. "Fine," I managed. Just my boss confirming something. We finished dinner. Marco walked me to my car like a gentleman, asked if he could see me again, accepted my non-committal response with grace. He didn't try to kiss me, and I was grateful. Dimitri followed me home, waited until I was inside my building before departing. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, exhausted and confused and angry at myself for ruining what should have been a perfectly nice evening by spending the entire time thinking about a man I worked for, who saw me as property to protect, who would never offer me anything resembling normal. My phone rang as I was unlocking my door. Marius. "Are you home?" he asked without preamble. "Yes." "Good." A pause. "How was dinner?" The question shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. "Fine. Marco was very nice." "Nice." The word sounded bitter on his tongue. "Will you see him again?" I should have said yes. Should have forced this thing, this whatever it was between us, into the box where it belonged. Boss and employee, nothing more. "I don't know," I admitted instead. Silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. "Good night, Bianca," Marius said finally. "Good night." I hung up and leaned against my door, closing my eyes. 3 years of careful professional distance, of maintaining boundaries, of pretending I was immune to Marius Orlov's particular brand of dangerous charisma, and one date with a nice, normal man had shattered all of it, because the truth I'd been avoiding was suddenly, painfully clear. I didn't want nice. I didn't want normal. I wanted the man who lit cigarettes he didn't smoke, who investigated potential threats with ruthless efficiency, who looked at me like I was something precious and dangerous and utterly irreplaceable. I wanted Marius, and that was going to destroy everything. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare, though Marius never fired a single shot. It started small. A meeting that ran long, making me miss my lunch with Marco. An urgent trip to Rome that materialized overnight, requiring my presence for 3 days straight. A client dinner where Marius needed me beside him. Charming visiting associates with my perfect English and easy smile, while he conducted business in that peculiar mix of Russian, Italian, and carefully coded phrases that meant things I'd learned not to ask about. Each time, he was apologetic. Each time, he claimed necessity. Each time, I rescheduled with Marco, whose patience was wearing thinner with every postponement. Your boss seems to need you at very inconvenient times, Marco observed over the phone after I'd canceled our third attempt at a second date. His tone remained pleasant, but I heard the edge beneath it. It's a demanding job, I replied, staring at the file Marius had dropped on my desk an hour ago, the one that absolutely could have waited until Monday, but somehow required my immediate attention on a Friday night. Maybe too demanding, Marco suggested gently. Bianca, I like you. I'd like to get to know you better, but I'm starting to feel like I'm competing with your career, and that's not a competition I can win. He was giving me an out, I realized. A graceful exit from something that had never quite gotten off the ground. I should have taken it, should have let him go with dignity and tact for both of us. Give me one more chance, I heard myself say instead. Tomorrow night. I'll make it work. After I hung up, I marched into Marius's office without knocking. He looked up from the contract he'd been reviewing, one eyebrow rising at my unannounced entrance. I'm taking tomorrow night off, I announced. No emergencies, no urgent meetings, no last-minute trips. I'm going out, and I'm turning off my work phone. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. That's not advisable given the current climate with the DeLuca situation. The DeLuca situation has been current for 2 weeks, I countered. Funny how it only flares up when I have plans. You think I'm manufacturing crises to keep you here? His voice was deceptively soft. I think you're very good at finding reasons why I'm indispensable at inconvenient moments. Marius set down his pen with precise care. You are indispensable, Bianca. Every moment. The admission hung between us, weighted with more than he was willing to say outright. But I was done with implications and subtext, done with this dance we'd been performing for 3 years. Then hire another assistant, I said quietly, because I can't keep doing this. Doing what? Existing in this space where I'm too important to leave, but not important enough for you to be honest about why. He stood, moving around his desk with that predatory grace I'd watched intimidate better people than me. You want honesty, Bianca? Fine. I don't want you seeing Marco Santini. I don't want you seeing anyone. The thought of another man's hands on you makes me want to commit violence that would shock even Dimitri. Is that honest enough? My breath caught. 3 years of wondering, of second-guessing every look and accidental touch, and he'd finally said it. Admitted what I'd suspected, but never dared confirm. Then why? I demanded. Why let me go on that first date at all? Why not just tell me this 2 weeks ago? Because you deserve better than this. He gestured at himself, at his office, at the empire built on fear and blood money that surrounded us. You deserve Marco with his architectural dreams and his normal family and his safe, boring life. You deserve nice, Bianca. And I am the furthest thing from nice that exists. That's not your choice to make, I shot back. What I deserve, what I want. Those are my decisions, not yours. Is it? He moved closer, near enough that I could see the silver threads in his dark hair, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible choices. Because from where I'm standing, you've spent 3 years working for me, learning my business, becoming complicit in everything I do. You think Marco Santini would want you if he knew the truth? If he knew about the shipments you schedule, the meetings you arrange, the problems you help me solve? The words struck like physical blows. You're trying to make me feel guilty for doing my job? I'm trying to make you understand that you crossed a line a long time ago, and there's no going back to normal. Not really. You can play pretend with men like Marco, but eventually they'll see what you've become. What I've made you. Anger flared white-hot. You didn't make me anything. I chose this job knowing exactly what I was walking into. I chose to stay every single day for 3 years. You don't get to take ownership of my choices just because you're too afraid to admit what you really want. What I want? His laugh was harsh. I want things I have no right to, Bianca. I want you in ways that have nothing to do with your exceptional organizational skills. I want to be the one taking you to dinner, putting my hand on your back, walking you to your door. I want to ruin you for every other man who thinks he might have a chance. The raw confession stole my breath. Marius, but I can't, he continued, his voice dropping. Because you were right when you called yourself an asset. You're the one person in my organization who isn't afraid of me, who speaks to me like I'm human instead of a monster. If I cross that line, if I make this what we both know it wants to be, I'll lose that. I'll lose you one way or another. And I'm selfish enough, monstrous enough, that I'd rather keep you at arm's length than not have you at all. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest and utterly devastating. 3 years of tension distilled into 30 seconds of truth. So, that's it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We just pretend this conversation never happened? Go back to professional distance and carefully maintained boundaries? That would be wise, he agreed. But he didn't move away, didn't put that distance back between us. I'm tired of wise, I admitted. I'm tired of safe. I went on that date with Marco hoping I'd feel something, anything that would make sense. Instead, I spent the entire evening wishing he was you. Marius closed his eyes, his jaw clenching. Don't. Don't what? Don't tell you the truth? You demanded honesty, Marius. Here it is. I don't want nice. I don't want normal. I want you, with all your dangerous complications and impossible moral ambiguity. I've wanted you for longer than I'm willing to admit. When he opened his eyes, the gray had darkened to something molten. You don't know what you're asking for. Then show me. It was a challenge and an invitation. Stop making decisions for me. Stop protecting me from yourself. Either claim what you want, or let me go find someone who will. The muscle in his jaw ticked. For a long moment he just stared at me, and I could see the war raging behind those gray eyes. Control versus desire. Wisdom versus want. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered it automatically, his gaze never leaving my face as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Handle it, he said tersely. I'm not available tonight. He ended the call and tossed the phone onto his desk. You wanted honesty? Here's more. Tomorrow night you're not going anywhere with Marco Santini. You're having dinner with me. Is that an order? I asked, my pulse racing. It's a request, he said. One I'm hoping you'll accept. And if I don't? His smile was dangerous, predatory. Then I'll sabotage your date so thoroughly that Marco will think you're a catastrophe he narrowly avoided. But you already knew that, didn't you? Despite everything, I laughed. You're awful. I'm possessive, he corrected. There's a difference. So what's it going to be, Bianca? Dinner with an architect who sees you as a nice girl he'd like to date, or dinner with a monster who sees you as the only thing in his world worth protecting? Put that way, there was no contest. I'll need to call Marco, I said. Use your personal phone, Marius replied. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I made the call from my office, explaining to Marco as gently as possible that I didn't think this was going to work, that my life was more complicated than I'd led him to believe. He was gracious about it, if disappointed, and I felt guilty for wasting his time. But I didn't feel regret. When I returned to Marius's office, he was standing at his window, backlit by the setting sun. He turned as I entered, a question in his eyes. Tomorrow night, I said. What time? The smile that crossed his face was genuine, transforming his features from austere to something almost boyish. 7. I'll pick you up. I know where you live, I pointed out. This is a date, Bianca. That means I come to your door like a civilized person, even if we both know I'm anything but. Something warm bloomed in my chest. Okay, 7. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Bianca, wear something beautiful. I want everyone who sees us to know that you're with me by choice, not obligation. As if anyone could be with Marius Orlov by obligation. As if he wasn't the kind of man women gravitated toward despite every warning, every red flag, every logical reason to run. That night, I stood in my closet, running my hands over dresses I'd accumulated over 3 years of attending events at Marius's side. Each one a memory. The blue one from the opera where Carlo De Luca had first noticed me, the black from a charity gala where Marius's hand on my back had burned through fabric, the silver from a New Year's celebration where we'd stood on his terrace at midnight, not quite touching, watching fireworks explode over the bay. I chose red, deep scarlet that hugged my curves and declared intentions I was done hiding. If I was doing this, if I was crossing this line with Marius Orlov, I was doing it with my eyes wide open, knowing exactly what kind of man I was choosing. A dangerous one, a possessive one. A man who built empires on fear and maintained them with ruthless efficiency, but also a man who'd protected me for 3 years, who valued my competence, who looked at me like I was precious and irreplaceable and utterly necessary. My phone buzzed with a text. Sleep well, Bianca. Tomorrow changes everything. I stared at those words for a long time before responding. I know. I'm counting on it. His reply came immediately. No going back after tomorrow. You understand that? I don't want to go back, I typed. I want to go forward. With you. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. Then tomorrow, you're mine. Completely. No more holding back. I should have been terrified. Should have recognized the possessive claim for what it was. A man who thought in terms of ownership and control. Instead, I felt something close to relief. Because for 3 years, I'd been holding back, pretending, maintaining careful distance from something that wanted to consume us both. Tomorrow, we'd stop pretending. Tomorrow, we'd see if what we'd built in stolen glances and careful words could survive in the harsh light of reality. Tomorrow, I'd discover if choosing Marius Orlov was the bravest thing I'd ever done, or the most catastrophic mistake of my life. Either way, there would be no going back. The scarlet dress fit like sin and promise, the fabric moving like water as I turned before my bedroom mirror. I'd spent an hour on my hair, another on makeup that looked effortless, but had required surgical precision to achieve. My hands shook slightly as I fastened the diamond earrings I'd bought myself last Christmas, a small luxury from my generous salary. My phone showed 6:47. Marius was never late. In 3 years, I'd never known him to be anything other than ruthlessly punctual. At 6:50, my doorbell rang. I took a breath, steadying myself, then opened the door. Marius stood in my hallway dressed in a black suit that had been tailored to his exact specifications. No tie. The collar of his white shirt opened to reveal the hollow of his throat. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd showered recently, and he smelled of cedar and something darker, more primal. His eyes traveled over me slowly, taking in every detail from my heels to my carefully styled hair. When his gaze finally met mine, the gray had darkened to something molten. "You're beautiful," he said simply, "but you already knew that." "You're not terrible yourself," I replied, grabbing my clutch from the table by the door. "Not terrible." His mouth quirked. "I'll accept that." He offered his arm, a surprisingly old-fashioned gesture from a man who usually commanded, rather than requested. "Shall we?" Dmitri waited by a sleek black car I'd seen 100 times, though never as a passenger. He opened the rear door without comment, his expression carefully neutral despite the fact that he'd just witnessed his boss picking up his assistant for what was clearly not a business dinner. The drive into the city center was quiet, charged with anticipation. Marius's hand rested on the seat between us, close enough that I could feel its heat without actual contact. Neither of us reached to close that final inch of distance, both aware that once we started touching, Stopping would become exponentially harder. "Where are we going?" I asked, watching Naples slide past the tinted windows. "Villa Romana," he replied. "I own it." Of course he did. Marius owned half the upscale establishments in Naples, either directly or through shell companies. It's how he maintained his empire. Legitimate businesses providing cover for less legitimate operations. The restaurant was tucked into a converted monastery in the Old Quarter. All ancient stone and soaring ceilings with modern updates that had cost a fortune. The maitre d' greeted Marius by name, his deference absolute as he led us through the main dining room to a private terrace overlooking the bay. Candles flickered on a table set for two, the golden light softening the edges of the world until it felt like we existed in a pocket universe, separate from everything else. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the water reflecting the colors back like a mirror. "You arranged all this," I said, taking in the roses in a crystal vase, the champagne chilling in silver, the way the table was positioned to offer perfect views of both the sunset and each other. "I wanted it to be perfect," he admitted, pulling out my chair. "You deserve perfect, Bianca, even from a man who is anything but." He'd said that before, this conviction that he was too flawed for me. I was beginning to understand it was genuine belief rather than false modesty. A waiter appeared with menus, then melted away with professional discretion. Marius poured champagne, the bubbles rising in crystal flutes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "To honesty," he said, raising his glass. "To terrible decisions," I countered, and he laughed, the sound genuine and startling in its warmth. We touched glasses, the crystal singing, and sipped. The champagne was perfect, because of course it was. Marius Orlov didn't do anything by halves. "I need you to understand something," he said, setting down his glass. "Before we go any further, before this becomes what we both know it's going to become. My life is complicated in ways you've only glimpsed. You've seen the surface, the meetings and negotiations. But there are depths I've kept from you deliberately. To protect me, I guessed. To protect us both." He leaned back, his expression serious. "The moment you become more than my assistant, you become a target. My enemies will see you as a weakness to exploit. My allies will wonder if your influence over me makes you dangerous to their interests. Everything changes, Bianca. Everything." "I know," I said quietly. "I've known since the moment you admitted what you wanted. This isn't a decision I'm making lightly, Marius. Isn't it?" His gaze was intent. "You think you know what you're signing up for, but knowing intellectually and experiencing reality are vastly different things. Once we cross this line, I will be possessive in ways that will suffocate you. I will demand loyalty that goes beyond employment. I will expect you to choose me over safety, over comfort, over every rational instinct that tells you to run." "Are you trying to talk me out of this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I'm trying to give you one last chance to walk away," he replied. "Because once you're mine, Bianca, I won't let you go. Not for Marco Santini, not for some fantasy of a normal life, not for anything. You need to know that before you make this choice." I set down my champagne, meeting his gaze steadily. "I spent 3 years watching you, learning how you think, understanding how your world works. I'm not naive about what being with you means, but I'm also not afraid of it." "You should be," he said softly. "I'm afraid of it, and I'm the monster in this scenario." "Stop calling yourself that," I said. "You're not a monster. You're a man who does difficult things in an impossible world. There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability breaking through the careful control. "You see me differently than anyone else does. Maybe because I'm the only person you let close enough to see you at all," I countered. "Everyone else gets the performance. I get the truth." "Not all of it," he admitted. There are things I've kept from you. Things you're better off not knowing. Then keep them, I said. I'm not asking you to unburden your soul, Marius. I'm just asking you to stop pretending you don't want this. Want me. He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming that familiar rhythm on the table. Then he stood, moving around to my side with that fluid grace I'd watched intimidate rivals and charm politicians. He extended his hand. Dance with me. There was no music, but I took his hand anyway, letting him pull me from my chair. His arm came around my waist, solid and possessive, while his other hand clasped mine against his chest. We swayed slowly in the candlelight, the only sound the distant murmur of the city and the crash of waves against ancient stone. I've wanted this for longer than I'm willing to admit, he said against my hair. Wanted you in my arms, in my life, in my bed. I told myself it was impossible, that keeping you at arm's length was protecting us both. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. From this feeling. From how completely you've taken over every part of my life. I tilted my head back to look at him. And now? Now I'm done pretending. His thumb traced my cheekbone, the touch so gentle it made my breath catch. Now I'm claiming what I want. Consequences be damned. Bold words, I murmured. I'm a bold man. His mouth curved. Or haven't you noticed? I've noticed. I'd noticed everything about him, catalogued every detail across 3 years of forced proximity. The way he took his coffee, the scar on his left eyebrow, the slight pause before he made decisions that would alter lives, the unexpected gentleness in his hands when he thought no one was watching. Tell me what you're thinking, he commanded softly. That I've been half in love with you for 2 years, I admitted, and completely in love with you for the last 6 months. That every date I tried to arrange with Marco was me running from something I knew would change everything. That I'm tired of running. His grip on me tightened. Say that again. Which part? The love part, he said, his voice rough. Say it again. I love you, I said clearly. I love you, and I know that's probably the most dangerous thing I could admit to a man like you, but I'm done hiding it. I'm done pretending that what I feel is anything less than complete and absolute. Something in him broke. I saw it happen. Watched the careful control shatter as he pulled me closer, his forehead dropping to rest against mine. Bianca, he breathed. My Bianca. Do you have any idea what you've just given me? What power you've handed over? I know exactly what I've given you, I replied. The same thing you're about to give me. His laugh was shaky. You think I'm about to confess my feelings like some lovesick boy? I think you already have, I said. In every text, every manufactured crisis to keep me close, every moment of jealousy you tried to disguise as protection. You love me, Marius Orlov. You're just terrified to say it out loud. Terrified, he agreed. Because men like me don't get to keep the things we love. We destroy them, or lose them, or watch them destroyed. I've spent 3 years trying not to love you, and it hasn't worked. You're in my blood, Bianca. You're the first thing I think about when I wake, and the last before I sleep. You're in every decision I make, every risk I calculate. You've been mine for so long that I don't remember what it felt like before. Then say it, I challenged. 3 words, if you mean them. His hands came up to cup my face, tilting it up so I had no choice but to hold his gaze. I love you, he said, each word deliberate and weighted. I love you with everything I have, everything I am, even the parts of me that are broken and dangerous and completely unsuited to deserving something as good as you. I love you, and that's never going to change. The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable. His mouth on mine was claiming and desperate, 3 years of restraint shattering in an instant. I kissed him back with equal fervor, my hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer. He tasted like champagne and promises, like power barely leashed and want given permission to finally breathe. His hand slid into my hair, ruining my careful styling, and I didn't care. Nothing mattered except this, the two of us finally admitting what we'd been dancing around for years. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes had darkened to storm clouds. "We're leaving," he said, his voice rough. "Now." "We haven't eaten," I pointed out breathlessly. "I don't care." His hands were still in my hair, his forehead pressed to mine. "I need you alone, Bianca. I need you in my bed, in my space, with no more barriers between us. I've waited 3 years. I'm not waiting another minute." Heat pooled low in my stomach at the raw want in his voice. "Then take me home." "My home," he corrected. "You're coming home with me, tonight and every night after." It was possessive and presumptuous and absolutely Marius, and I loved him for it. "Yes," I agreed. "Take me home." Marius's penthouse was a study in controlled luxury, all clean lines and expensive materials arranged with the precision of a man who valued order in chaos. I'd been here countless times for work, but never like this. Never as someone crossing the threshold into his personal space rather than his professional domain. The door closed behind us with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. We stood in the foyer, the city sprawling below through floor-to-ceiling windows, neither of us quite ready to take the final step that would change everything irrevocably. "Second thoughts?" Marius asked, his voice low and careful. "None," I replied honestly. "You?" "Too many to count." His hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "But none of them matter more than having you here." He kissed me again, slower this time, less desperation and more discovery. His hands mapped my waist, my hips, the curve of my spine through scarlet fabric. I learned the shape of him through expensive wool, the hardness of muscle beneath civilized clothing, the way his breath caught when my fingers found the buttons of his shirt. "Bedroom?" he murmured against my mouth. "Unless you want our first time to be against this wall." "I've waited 3 years," I said, working the first button free. "I can wait 30 more seconds." His laugh was rough as he swept me up, carrying me through his apartment to a bedroom dominated by a massive bed. He set me down gently, his hands already reaching for the zipper of my dress. "Let me," I said, stopping him. "I want you to watch." Something primal flashed in his eyes, but he stepped back, giving me space. I turned, presenting my back so he could see the zipper that ran from nape to tailbone. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they lowered it, knuckles brushing skin as he revealed inch by inch of bare flesh. The dress pooled at my feet, leaving me in only the lingerie I'd chosen specifically for tonight. Black lace that had cost a fortune and was worth every cent for the way Marius was looking at me now. "Christ, Bianca," he breathed. "You're going to kill me." "Not yet," I replied, reaching for him. "I have plans for you first." What followed was heat and discovery, 3 years of pent-up want finally given permission to breathe. Marius was as commanding in bed as he was in boardrooms, but also surprisingly gentle. Learning what made me gasp, what made me arch into his touch, what drew my name from his lips like a prayer. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets that probably cost more than my car, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on my shoulder. "Stay," he said into the darkness. "I'm not going anywhere," I assured him. "No, I mean permanently." He shifted so he could look at me. "Move in with me. Be with me completely. Not just when it's convenient or after work hours. I want you in my life, Bianca. All of it." I propped myself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the windows. "That's a big step." "I'm aware." His hand came up to tuck hair behind my ear. "I'm also aware that I have no right to ask, that it's too soon, that you deserve time to adjust to this new reality. But I've never been patient, and I'm not about to start now. I want you here, every night, every morning. No more separate spaces, no more distance, just us. Part of me recognized this as the possessive control he'd warned me about. But another part, the part that had fallen in love with him despite every logical reason not to, understood what he was really asking. Not for ownership, but for commitment. Not for submission, but for partnership in the only way Marius Orlov knew how to build one. Okay, I said. He blinked. Okay? I'll move in, I clarified. On one condition. Wariness crept into his expression. What condition? I keep my apartment, I said firmly. Not because I'm planning to run, but because I need to know I have somewhere that's mine if I ever need space. I need that security, Marius, that safety net. I waited for him to argue, to demand absolute surrender to his terms. Instead, he nodded slowly. Fair enough, he agreed. Though I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you never want to use it. I'm counting on that, I replied, settling back against his chest. We were quiet for a long moment, the intimacy of silence speaking louder than words. Then Marius's phone buzzed on the nightstand, shattering the peace. He reached for it automatically, old habits dying hard even in the aftermath of finally getting what he wanted. I watched his expression change as he read the message, professional focus replacing post-coital contentment. Problem? I asked. Possibly. He set the phone down, but I could see his mind already shifting into strategic mode. The Amsterdam shipment. There's been a complication. I'd learned enough about his business to read between those lines. Complication meant someone had either betrayed him or tried to take what was his. Either way, it required his attention. Do you need to go? I asked, already knowing the answer. Not tonight, he said, pulling me closer. Tonight, you're more important than business. Dmitri can handle the initial assessment. I'll deal with it in the morning. The fact that he was choosing me over work, over the empire he'd built and maintained with ruthless efficiency, said more than any declaration could have. Marius Orlov didn't delegate important matters, didn't trust anyone else to handle crises. Except apparently, when the alternative was leaving my bed. Tell me something, I said, tracing the scar on his ribs I'd discovered earlier. How long have you actually been in love with me? His hand stilled on my hair. You want the truth? Always. Since the night you came to me 6 months into your employment, he said quietly. You'd been dealing with your mother's medical bills, and I'd arranged for her treatment. You came to my office to thank me, and you were crying. Not dramatic tears, just quiet sadness for what you couldn't fix on your own, and you looked at me like I'd saved the world instead of just making a few phone calls. I remembered that night. Remembered the overwhelming gratitude I'd felt, the surprise that this dangerous man had shown such unexpected kindness. You became real to me in that moment, he continued. Not just competent, not just useful. Real, human. Someone who felt things deeply and tried to hide it behind professionalism. I wanted to protect that softness, even as I wanted to possess it completely. Possessive, I murmured. Excessively. He agreed without apology. It's who I am, Bianca. I warned you. You did, I confirmed, but I'm finding I don't mind as much as I thought I would. His laugh rumbled through his chest. Give it time. You'll probably want to stab me within a week. I'll make a note to keep sharp objects away from the bedroom, I replied, and he laughed again, the sound free and genuine in a way I'd rarely heard. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, my head on his chest, his arms wrapped around me like he could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd looked through 100 times from the other side of Marius's office door. For a moment, disorientation gripped me. Then memory flooded back. Red dress, confessions, the feeling of finally being where I belonged. Marius was already awake, propped against the headboard with his tablet, conducting business from bed with the same focus he brought to everything. He'd put on reading glasses I'd never seen before, and they made him look almost professorial, softening his dangerous edges. "Good morning," he said without looking up from whatever report he was reviewing. "There's coffee on your nightstand. 2 sugars, splash of cream, exactly how you like it." I sat up, accepting the mug he'd prepared. "You're working." "The Amsterdam situation required attention," he replied, finally setting aside the tablet. "But it's handled now." Dmitri was efficient, as always. "What happened?" I asked, genuinely curious about the business I'd been adjacent to for 3 years but never fully inside. Marius studied me for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Then he sighed. "Someone tried to skim from the shipment," he said. "A relatively small amount, probably thinking it wouldn't be noticed. They were wrong." "And now?" I asked, fairly certain I knew the answer. "And now they're being reminded of the cost of betrayal," he replied, his voice flat and emotionless. "Nothing fatal, but memorable enough that no one else will try the same thing." This was the reality I'd chosen, not just the man who'd held me tenderly last night, but the one who ordered violence with the same casualness other men ordered coffee. The duality that made Marius who he was. "Does it bother you?" he asked quietly. "Knowing what I do, what I order done?" "Yes," I admitted honestly. "And no. I can't reconcile the man who threatened Marco with the man who saved my mother. But I've stopped trying to. You're both those people, Marius, the tender and the terrible. And somehow, I love you anyway." Relief flashed across his features. "I need you to understand something, Bianca. Now that you're truly in my life, you'll see things, hear things, know things that you've been shielded from. There will be moments when you'll question this choice, when you'll wonder what kind of woman falls in love with a man like me." "I already know what kind," I replied. "The strong kind, the kind who looks at the whole picture and makes her own decisions instead of letting fear make them for her." "Brave or foolish," he murmured. "Maybe both." I leaned over to kiss him. "But definitely committed. You're stuck with me now." "Good," he said against my mouth, "because I have no intention of letting you go." The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. I moved my essential items into Marius's penthouse, but kept my apartment as promised. He didn't object, though I sometimes caught him looking at me as if calculating whether I might actually use that escape route. At work, we maintained professional distance, though everyone on staff clearly knew something had changed between us. Dmitri developed a slight smirk whenever he saw us together. The other men in Marius's organization treated me with even more deference than before, recognizing that I was no longer just protected property, but something infinitely more valuable. Marius's girlfriend, his partner, the woman who'd somehow tamed the untamable, except I hadn't tamed him at all. If anything, having me fully in his life seemed to unleash something in Marius. The possessiveness he'd warned me about manifested in 1,000 small ways. His hand at the small of my back in public, the way he rearranged meetings so we could have lunch together, the expensive gifts that appeared without occasion, jewelry and clothes and first editions of books I'd mentioned loving years ago. "You're spoiling me," I observed one evening as I opened a box containing a necklace that probably cost more than a car. "I'm showing you what you mean to me," he corrected. "There's a difference. Marius, I don't need expensive things to know you care." "I know," he said, fastening the necklace around my throat. "But I want to give them to you anyway. I've spent 41 years taking what I want. Let me enjoy giving you what you deserve." How could I argue with that? How could I tell a man who'd built empires on control and careful calculation that his gestures of affection were excessive when they made him so genuinely happy? The answer was simple. I couldn't. And I didn't want to. 3 weeks into our new arrangement, I was working late in Marius's office, reviewing contracts for a legitimate real estate acquisition in Rome, when his phone rang. He answered it with his usual crisp efficiency, but I watched his expression darken as he listened. "When?" he asked, his voice dropping to that dangerous register. "How many?" I couldn't hear the response, but whatever it was made Marius's jaw tighten. "Lockdown protocol," he ordered. "No one in or out until I give clearance. And Dmitri, find them. I want this handled by morning." He ended the call and immediately began making others, his focus absolute. I waited, knowing he'd explain when he was ready. After the 5th call, he finally looked at me. "There's a situation," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about, but I need you to stay here tonight. Don't go home. Don't leave the building. Can you do that?" "Of course," I replied. "But Marius, what's happening?" He was quiet for a moment, wrestling with how much to share. "Someone made a move against one of my operations. An aggressive move that suggests they're not interested in negotiation." "War?" I said, understanding the implications. "Potentially." He moved to the window, that familiar gesture when conversations turn difficult. "I've been expecting this. The De Luca family has been positioning for months. Tonight they made their opening move." Fear curled in my stomach, not for myself, but for him. "What are you going to do?" "What I always do," he replied. "Protect what's mine. Respond with overwhelming force. Make it clear that challenging me comes with a cost no one wants to pay." He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not quite fear, but close. Worry, perhaps. Genuine concern. "This is what I tried to warn you about," he said quietly. "This is the reality of my world. Threats and counter-threats, violence met with greater violence, an endless cycle of dominance and submission where weakness means death." I stood, crossing to him at the window. "I know. Do you?" His hands came up to grip my shoulders. "Because once this starts, it won't stop until someone is destroyed completely. And you're now part of that equation, Bianca. You're leverage against me, a potential target, something my enemies will see as a weakness to exploit. Then we make sure they see me as a strength instead," I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting from reality, Marius. I'm the woman who chose you knowing exactly what that meant. I'm not running, and I'm not hiding. We face this together, or not at all." Something shifted in his expression. Pride and possessiveness, and that deep, abiding love that still sometimes shocked me with its intensity. "Together," he agreed. "But Bianca, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If I tell you to run, you run," he said seriously. "No arguments, no hesitation. If it comes to that, if the situation becomes untenable, I need to know you'll save yourself even if I can't. Marius, promise me," he insisted. "It's the only way I can function if this escalates, knowing that you'll prioritize your safety over loyalty to me." I understood what he was asking. The ultimate insurance policy. The knowledge that even if he fell, I would survive. "I promise," I said, "but it won't come to that." "You can't know that," he replied. "Yes, I can," I countered, "because you're Marius Orlov, and you don't lose, ever." His smile was grim. "There's always a first time." "Not tonight," I said firmly. "Not with me to fight for. You're too stubborn to let anyone take what's yours, and I'm definitely yours." "Damn right you are," he agreed, pulling me close. Mine. Completely. And heaven help anyone who thinks otherwise. We stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, while his empire mobilized for war around us. Outside the windows, Naples glittered with lights, beautiful and dangerous, and entirely unaware of the battle about to be fought in its shadows. This was my life now. Luxury and danger, power and vulnerability, a love so intense it sometimes felt like drowning. And I wouldn't have changed it for anything. The war, when it came, was quiet. Not the explosive violence of movies, but calculated moves and counter-moves played out in shipments that disappeared, operations that mysteriously failed, businesses that suddenly found themselves unable to function. Marius fought back with surgical precision, dismantling DeLuca interests with the same cold efficiency he brought to everything. I watched from the sidelines, handling his legitimate business while he orchestrated the shadow war that consumed his nights. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and tension so thick it was hard to breathe. 3 weeks of Dimitri's grim reports and Marius's increasingly dangerous mood. 3 weeks of me refusing to leave his side despite his increasingly insistent suggestions that I stay away. The end came abruptly. One morning, Marius emerged from a meeting with an expression I'd learned to recognize. Satisfaction, cold, and absolute. "It's done," he said simply. DeLuca accepted terms. "What terms?" I asked. "Complete withdrawal from Naples, forfeiture of 3 key operations, public acknowledgement of my territory." His smile was predatory. "They overplayed their hand. Now they pay the price." Relief washed through me. "It's over?" "This particular battle," he confirmed. "There will be others. There always are. But for now, we've won." That night, I found him on the terrace of the penthouse, a cigarette burning between his fingers. He'd been smoking more during the conflict, the habit he claimed not to have fully manifesting under stress. "You're going to ruin your lungs," I observed, joining him at the railing. "I'll quit tomorrow," he replied, as he had every other time I'd made similar comments. "You said that yesterday." "Tomorrow," he insisted, but stubbed out the cigarette anyway. "How are you feeling about all this?" "Honestly?" I leaned against him. "Relieved it's over. Proud of you for winning. Slightly concerned about what comes next." "Next is peace," he said. "For a while, at least. Time to focus on the legitimate businesses. Time to remind Naples why it's better to work with me than against me. Time for us," I added. "That too." He turned to face me fully. "Bianca, I need to ask you something." Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. "What?" Instead of answering, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. My breath stopped as he opened it, revealing a ring that caught the city lights and scattered them like stars. "I know it's fast," he said. "I know we've only been together a few months, even though I've been in love with you for years. I know that asking you to bind yourself to me legally is asking you to make yourself an even bigger target than you already are. But I'm asking anyway." "Marius, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "You've seen the worst of me these past weeks. The violence, the ruthlessness, the part of me that solves problems with force rather than negotiation. You've seen me at war, Bianca, and you didn't run. You stood beside me, kept my business running, were the calm in my storm. You're my partner in every way that matters. I want to make that official." He took a breath, and for the first time since I'd known him, Marius Orlov looked nervous. "Marry me," he said. "Not because it's logical or strategic, but because I love you. Because you're the best decision I never meant to make. Because I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth making sure you never regret choosing a monster." I looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the life he was offering. Dangerous and unpredictable, and absolutely nothing like I'd imagined my future would be. And I'd never wanted anything more. "You're not a monster," I said, taking the ring from the box and sliding it onto my finger. "You're just Marius, complicated and possessive and mine. And yes, I'll marry you." The kiss that followed was claiming and tender, celebration and relief. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "You're sure?" he asked. "Because there's no going back after this." "I've been sure since the night you lit that cigarette," I replied. "Maybe even before." "Stop giving me chances to run, Marius. I'm not going anywhere." "Good," he murmured, "because I'm never letting you go." 6 months later, we married in a small ceremony attended only by those closest to us. My mother, recovered and glowing with health thanks to Marius's intervention. Dmitri, standing as best man with barely concealed approval. A handful of others who'd earned their place in our strange, dangerous family. Nothing about it was conventional. Nothing about us was conventional. But as I stood beside Marius Orlov, promising forever to a man who commanded empires and inspired fear, I'd never been more certain of anything. This was my choice. My life. My love. And I regretted nothing. So, what did you think? Leave a like if you enjoyed it and comment. Would you have made the same choice as her? Share with someone who loves these stories.